The topic of the lecture is conjugality. It is also, what do you understand by conjugality? Anybody would like to tell me or tell all of us? What is conjugality? Our first lecture was on the family. The second was on childhood. The third one was on courtship. And the fourth one is on conjugality. So what is conjugality, or what is conjugal intimacy?
In my opinion, conjugality is a kind of relationship which is not based on blood relationship, but still having a very deep tie between husband and wife. So which is, I think, based on usually love, kind of compassion, or deep passion between two people.
Between husband and wife.
Yes.
That's right. Anybody else want to say something else? Would you like to share the type of relationship that exists between husband and wife in our society? Anybody would want to? There can be different types of relationships. I mean, he's given us one view according to which there is a deep love and passion between husband and wife. So I'm thinking aloud with you that there can be different types, different intensities of it. We have to ask the question whether this deep relationship between husband and wife is expressed in public. Is it there for us to see, or is it kept a little bit in the private? And if it is kept in the private, then how do you and I know that such a relationship exists? How do you and I, as sociologists, not as persons, as sociologists, what is the evidence that such a relationship exists between husband and wife? Do you think in all the societies and cultures you come from, there is this deep, intense relationship between husband and wife? You would like to tell me something?
I'm not really sure that I want to tell something about this. It depends, and it's not only about the question of culture, what kind of relationship will exist between husband and wife. And very often this kind of relationship is established only with the purpose of children.
The purpose
of the purpose of children, of bringing up, of growing children. This is the most important definition. This is the most important element that defines marriage.
It's already interesting. We've had two kinds of views. One is saying that it is a relationship between two people, and the other view is that this is a relationship primarily for reproduction, for having children. Anybody else wants to say anything?
I'm probably not the best person to describe this, but from what I learned many years ago about Japanese society, these kind of relationships change throughout history as well. The way I studied it was that the romantic love marriage aspect was brought over into Japan through the West. They adopted the Western ideal of it, and before that, there was a whole different political thing going on between husband and wife, and it's more systematic, probably closer to what Christina has said.
Thank you. So you said that you made the third point that this is a historical relationship, that it is not natural. So already, I think more or less from your responses, it is very clear that this is a subject which sociologists must address, and address with a historical sensibility, and address with a cultural sensibility. So, if we have a certain notion of conjugality, or the category of conjugality itself, conjugal intimacy, the category of conjugal intimacy itself has been handed down to us from, it comes from the Western culture. It comes from a Western understanding of relationships between husband and wife. But this doesn't mean that this model or this template is or can be found in all societies at all points of time. Okay, so that should be, that is the spirit, and that is the bent of mind with which we approach this particular theme. Another term or another way in which we can look at conjugality is in terms of intimacy. Because if we go back to the first lecture, I think this is what the first lecture was all about. That we are going to be looking at forms of intimacy in family relations. And the form of intimacy in the relation between husband and wife is the conjugal intimacy. And what the slide is saying is simply that the fact that there is intimacy between married couples, it is established theme in Western social science. Note here that when we talk of conjugal intimacy, we have entered into the institution of marriage. In the previous lecture, we were looking at forms of intimacy not within the institution of marriage. In fact, we were trying to ask the question that before marriage, what happens? That do people get married with a prior, with the prior feeling of love for their spouse? Or in societies like India, I can speak about, and maybe some other traditional societies, marriage is not necessarily a fallout of love between people. And it is also a very important question by itself to explore and examine as to what is marriage all about. How should we understand marriage? Is marriage primarily a relationship between husband and wife, two individuals? Or is marriage a relationship between two families? Or is marriage something which represents a culture's values? What is marriage all about? So clearly, that's another kind of a question. That is another kind of a theme. And I cannot get into it very directly, but I will leave you with those questions to think about, because all of those, ultimately what marriage is all about, determines all the other things to follow. If marriage becomes an institution to ensure that there is reproduction in society, then needn't be love in marriage. I mean, you don't have to have love to procreate, necessarily. But this whole idea that in the institution of marriage, the two people, and of course again here we are talking about heterosexual marriage. That's only one model we are talking about. That in Western social science, the understanding of marriage is that it is based on a relationship of intimacy between individuals who get married. So, whatever else the marriage may be all about, in the West at least, the understanding is that if marriage is performing the function of reproduction, of transmission of property, of transmission of name, of socializing children, of educating them into the ways of culture, let marriage do that, but let us also ensure that people who agree or people who are going to be married have some choice in the matter. That is, let it be based on love. Let there be no other considerations. For instance, even in India today, how much of a choice do individuals have in getting married is one question we can ask. And this can be a very interesting question of comparative interest, comparison between societies. Do individuals have a choice? And in the last lecture I said this, that up to a point, yes, but parents are very much involved in individuals' life, in their marriages. So which means that I cannot just go up to my parents and say that, look, this is so and so, I've met and I've decided to get married to, and we have decided to live, to start a family. It's not like that. And this might be the case in Western societies. It might be the case in Japan to an extent, I don't know. But marriage is a very, very big affair. So coming back to these themes of intimacy between married couples, we have already entered marriage. We are into the institution of marriage. So what we have skipped conceptually is marriage. Because the last lecture was before marriage, now we are after marriage. So marriage is what we have skipped. Because it's very, very extensive and I have only this much of time to talk to you. But otherwise, that's something we must also think about. So this is an established theme in Western social science. The last lecture, when we were talking about courtship, I told you that we are going to be approaching courtship through youth, through a category, which is a category of the life course. Childhood, youth, adulthood, maturity, old, like that. So the problems I kind of presented to you last time regarding the methodological problems of, okay, that if my interest is in conjugality, then how should I study it? So I had to devise an approach. So because I was thinking in terms of childhood and youth, so very automatically, my approach to courtship and to conjugality becomes adulthood. And though again, let me tell you, the notions of who is an adult will vary from society to society. For instance, as an example, in India now rarely, much rarer, but supposing there's an institution of child marriage, what we today call child marriage, which means the time when a girl attains puberty, she is married off. So at a particular point of time, that you skip the adolescence. If a girl or children are married off at that young an age, at puberty, and in India, traditionally, in some society, among some communities, the marriage of the children was fixed by the parents. You know, it was by word of mouth. Okay, if I have a daughter, I'm going to marry her to your son. That is even before the kid is born. So basically, all of these things tell us that whether we are talking of childhood or youth or adulthood, these are all historical constructs. Because if a couple of decades down the line in India, you know, before adulthood would not be same as the adulthood today. Who is an adult or who is a child? Because once the little girl is married, she ceases to be a child because technically she is able to produce, to bear a child. Supposing at the age of 14 years, somebody bears a child, then she is no longer a child because these terms are also very relational. So the point is that our approach to conjugality in the Indian context is going to be adulthood. And that in a sense also falls it kind of sketches a pattern with the other two stages we have spoken about, that is childhood and youth. Okay, and the reason why I have taken this methodological line, you know, somebody can ask me that why should you go to youth and adulthood to talk about a relationship of intimacy? Why can't we just talk about, go and study husbands and wife, irrespective of whether they are of whatever age? Why was I so... I don't have to go via age. Let me identify my field via the relationship. So whether the husband or wife is between 60 and 70, between 30 and 40, between 20 and 25, it should not have mattered. Okay, so the point is, I have taken a particular line, a particular methodological line. And the reasons for this are, my reasons for this are, that if you read scholarship or scholarly writings of the field, you don't get too much. You don't get to hear too much about conjugality. You don't get to know too much about conjugal relations. There isn't enough research. And people would be able to qualify the fact that there hasn't been enough research because they say in the traditional Indian context, the couple was really not a very important motive in the society. It was not a very important social entity in society because traditionally what has been more important is community and the extended family. The couple in a sense didn't stand out to be noted, for someone to take note of the couple. So it was very difficult for me to actually go and, where you start. So if I were to look for literature on conjugal intimacy, my thesis would be that there isn't anything to fall back on. Unless, of course, I went to then read a lot of fiction and other kinds of literature. But I didn't do that. So I'm basically trying to explain to you my methodological line of approaching conjugality through adulthood. One, because there isn't much literature on conjugal intimacy per se. But if you read about, there are certain kinds of perspectives, especially coming from psychology, psychoanalysis, anthropology, which talk about adulthood, which talk about growing up, stages. They talk about stages, that from childhood to youth to adult, to maturity. Okay, so this is how I had to opt for this line of thinking.